Hey, my dear friends, in this story, I'm gonna share how one chance meeting changed everything I thought I knew about love and myself. Get comfy, grab a tea or coffee, and stick with me till the end. It's gonna be a ride, I promise. My name's Noah, I'm 28, and for the last 5 years, I've been living with Elliot in Charleston, South Carolina. We had a gorgeous house in the French Quarter, a parrot named Rico, and a habit of strolling the waterfront on Sundays. To everyone else, we were the perfect couple. Friends loved our cozy home, and customers at my flower shop teased that we belonged in a rom-com. But behind that picture, there was an emptiness I tried hard to ignore. Elliot, an architect, was always buried in work. Blueprints, meetings, calls till midnight. Mornings, he'd sip coffee, scrolling his tablet, while I fed Rico and got ready for the shop. I worked as a florist at Southern Blooms, my days filled with the scent of roses and chats with customers. Evenings, Elliot and I ate dinner, trading a few words about the weather or news. We slept side by side, but without hugs, without warmth. I didn't realize how much I missed closeness until I met Theo. It happened on a Friday, after a long day at the shop. Elliot had canceled our plans again, blaming a project, so I wandered to the Charleston market. There, among the stalls, I spotted a colorful van with "Coffee on the Move" painted on it. Behind the counter was Theo, tall, with chestnut curls and a smile that made me want to linger. He offered me an espresso and teased, "You look like you need more than coffee, you need an adventure." His voice was warm, with a soft southern drawl. We got talking while he made my drink. Theo said he traveled across South Carolina, selling coffee and playing music at local markets. His energy was infectious, his eyes sparkled when he talked about his songs. I mentioned I lived with my partner, and he nodded, but his gaze held mine a little too long. As I turned to leave, he handed me a paper cup and said, "There's a note on the bottom, don't miss it." I walked away, feeling something stir inside me. At home, Elliot was glued to his laptop, barely looking up. I tucked the cup in my bag to check the note later and went to bed, but thoughts of Theo kept me awake. His smile, his voice, the way he looked at me like he knew my secrets, they swirled in my mind. I knew that meeting wasn't just a coincidence. After that meeting with Theo, I couldn't stop thinking about him, even though I tried convincing myself it was just a random chat. His note on the bottom of the cup read, "Find me at the market on Wednesday, I'll make you the best coffee in Charleston." I tucked the note into my work apron's pocket and spent the whole weekend catching myself smiling, remembering his voice. Work at Southern Blooms kept me busy, but every time I tied a bouquet or trimmed stems, my mind drifted to Theo, to his curls, to how he leaned closer to hear me over the market's noise. Elliot didn't notice a thing. He was too caught up planning his next project, and our evenings passed in the usual silence. On Wednesday morning, I told Elliot I'd be late at the shop because of an order, but really, I was heading to the market. Guilt pricked at me, but I pushed it aside, putting on my favorite blue shirt, the one Elliot once called my best. The Charleston market was buzzing, the smell of fresh croissants, vendors' laughter, the sound of a street violin. I spotted Theo's van at the edge of the square, decked out with fairy lights and painted coffee cups. Theo was behind the counter, chatting with an older couple, and when he saw me, he grinned wide. "I knew you'd show up," he said, handing me a lot. "This one's with cinnamon, just how you like it." We talked while he served customers. Theo shared that he used to play in an indie band but quit after it fell apart. Now he traveled, selling coffee and writing melodies for himself. His openness drew me in, and I found myself telling him about my dream of opening my own floral studio. When the rush of customers slowed, Theo stepped out from behind the counter and suggested a walk. We strolled through the market, and he brushed my hand, adjusting my bag as it slipped off my shoulder. It was quick, but I felt a warmth spread across my skin. Theo stopped at a vinyl stall, flipping through records, talking about his love for old cassette tapes. "There's something about their sound," he said, looking at me, "like they hold a piece of someone's soul." I nodded, but I was thinking less about cassettes and more about how close he was standing. When he handed me another coffee, our fingers touched, and he didn't pull away right away. "You gotta come back to the market on Friday," he said. "I'll show you something special." I agreed without hesitation and left the market feeling alive for the first time in months. At home, Elliot asked how my day was, but I brushed it off, mentioning only work. Going to bed felt strange. I looked at Elliot reading something on his phone and thought of Theo, his smile, the way he stared at me. I knew I was walking on thin ice, but I didn't want to stop. I couldn't get Theo out of my mind, and every meeting sparked something in me I hadn't felt in years. After our market walk, I hunted for his van almost daily, making excuses to Elliot and myself. On Friday, Theo texted, "Come to Mount Pleasant tomorrow, help with flowers for the market." I said yes without thinking, knowing it was more than just work. I told Elliot I was going for shop business, and he nodded, eyes fixed on his tablet. Guilt flickered somewhere deep, but the need to see Theo overpowered it. In the morning, I drove to Mount Pleasant, where Theo waited by his van. He wore a fitted gray t-shirt, sleeves rolled up, his skin catching the morning light. "Ready to create?" he asked, handing me a basket of flowers. We worked together, arranging bouquets for his coffee stall. Our hands brushed as he passed me chrysanthemums or adjusted my stems. His fingers lingered on mine a little too long, and each touch sent warmth coursing through my veins. "You've got a gift," he said, leaning close to tie a ribbon. His voice was low, his breath grazing my neck, making me hold my breath. When we finished, we sat on the grass by the van, sipping his coffee. Theo shared how he quit music after a grueling tour, and I admitted flowers kept me sane amid the emptiness at home. "You don't look empty," he said softly, locking eyes with me. His knee pressed against mine, and I didn't move away. The air between us hummed with tension. He handed me a water bottle, and as our fingers met, his thumb traced my wrist, slow, like he was testing my skin. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard him speak. Later, Theo suggested stepping into his van to hear one of his melodies. Inside, it was cramped, smelling of coffee, wood, and something like his cologne. His guitar sat in a corner, shelves stuffed with cassettes. He played one, and gentle guitar chords wrapped around us. We stood close, and when he turned to adjust the tape deck, his shoulder brushed mine. "This one's about the road," he said, but his voice faltered as he looked at me. Our faces were so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. His hand rose to my shoulder, fingers gliding along my collarbone, light but deliberate, sending shivers across my skin. "You make me forget my words," he whispered, his eyes lingering on my lips. I leaned closer, my body drawn to him, but he stepped back gently, smiling. "Come on, the market's waiting." I got home feeling like I was teetering on an edge. Elliot was asleep, and I lay awake, replaying Theo's touch, his scent, his gaze. This wasn't just friendship anymore, and I didn't know how to stop. Every day without Theo felt hollow, and I caught myself counting hours until our next meeting. His touches in Mount Pleasant left a mark I could still feel on my skin, even back home. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't stop. The next Friday, Theo texted, "Come to my place tonight, I'll show you my old cassettes." My heart jumped, and I replied I'd be there, though excitement and fear battled inside me. I told Elliot I was meeting a flower supplier, and he didn't question it as usual, engrossed in his phone. Lying got easier, but the guilt grew heavier. I arrived at Theo's small Charleston house, surrounded by magnolias. He opened the door in a black t-shirt that hugged his chest, his smile stealing my breath. "Welcome to my chaos," he said, letting me in. The living room smelled of sandalwood and coffee, with stacks of cassettes on the floor and a guitar against the wall. We sat on the couch, and he played one of his old recordings. A raspy voice and soft chords filled the room. "This is from my 20s, he said, his knee brushing mine, sending sparks through my body. We talked about music, how he wrote songs, but I barely listened, fixated on his hand resting on the couch's back, an inch from my shoulder. He leaned to grab another cassette, his elbow grazing my thigh, accidental, but enough to set my skin ablaze. "Ever write songs?" he asked, locking eyes with me. His voice was lower than usual, and the air felt thicker. I shook my head, not trusting my voice, and he smiled, scooting closer. "Maybe you'll inspire me to write one." Theo stood to swap the cassette, and I followed him to the shelf without thinking. We ended up pressed close, his back nearly touching my chest. He turned, and our eyes met, his darker than usual, filled with something I couldn't name. "You're making this harder," he whispered, his hand settling on my wrist, fingers gripping my skin, sending heat through me. I felt his thumb slide along the inside of my wrist, slow, like he was memorizing every inch. My breath hitched and I leaned closer, drawn to the warmth of his body. His lips were so near I could feel their heat, but he froze. "You're with someone, Noah," he said softly, though his hand didn't let go. I nodded but didn't pull back, and for a moment, we just stood, breathing in sync. He gently stepped away, changing the cassette, and offered coffee like nothing happened. I left an hour later, but his touch burned on my skin. At home, Elliot was asleep, and I lay awake, my body still aching for Theo. I knew I'd crossed a line, even without taking a step. Thoughts of Theo consumed me, and I couldn't pretend it was just friendship anymore. After that night at his house, his touches lingered like they'd seeped into my skin. I knew I should stop, but instead, I looked for any excuse to see him again. The next week, Theo texted, "Come to the market Saturday, I've got something for you." I replied instantly, my heart racing with anticipation. I told Elliot I was picking up flowers for the shop, and he, as always, didn't notice, lost in his blueprints. Lying had become second nature, but thoughts of Theo melted my guilt into desire. On Saturday, the Charleston market was buzzing, but I spotted Theo's van right away, decked out with new fairy lights. He stood behind the counter in a snug blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed. When he saw me, his smile warmed my chest. "You made it," he said, handing me a coffee and a small cassette wrapped in ribbon. "This is for you, listen later." His fingers brushed mine, lingering, and I felt his thumb graze my palm, sending a shiver through me. We worked together, decorating his stall with flowers I'd brought. Our movements were in sync, but every time he leaned to grab a rose or adjust a vase, his shoulder pressed against mine, and I felt the heat of his skin through his thin shirt. "You make this place prettier," he said softly, almost a whisper, his hand sliding down my back, resting at my waist. It was brief, but my body reacted instantly, my heart pounding. I looked at him, and his eyes, dark and intent, flicked to my lips before he turned away, like he was fighting himself. Later, when the market quieted, Theo suggested we slip into his van to check supplies. Inside, it was warm, smelling of coffee and his cologne, the tight space amplifying the tension. He closed the door, and we were alone, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. "I wrote a melody," he said, playing a cassette. The guitar chords were slow, almost hypnotic. He stepped closer, his hand settling on my shoulder, fingers trailing down my arm, leaving a burning path. "It's about someone I can't stop thinking about," he whispered, his breath brushing my neck. I felt his fingers find my hand, lacing with mine, and he tugged me gently toward him. My body leaned in, our chests nearly touching, his warmth wrapping around me. His lips were so close I could smell them, coffee and mint. "We shouldn't," he said, but his grip tightened, and I saw his eyes darken with want. He pulled back, stopping the cassette, and suggested we get back to work. I left the market clutching his cassette, my body still trembling. At home, Elliot was watching TV, oblivious to my state. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. I could only think of Theo, his hands, how close we'd been. Theo had become my obsession, and I no longer tried to fight it. His cassettes, slipped into my bag or left under the shop counter, played through my earphones every night, each melody feeling like it was written for me. I knew we were teetering on the edge, but I didn't want to step back. The following Thursday, Theo texted, "Come to my place after sunset, I want to show you a new song." My body reacted before my mind, and I replied I'd be there. I told Elliot I was staying late with a client, but he barely looked up from his laptop. Lying was as natural as breathing now, but every glance from Theo erased my guilt. I arrived at his house as the Charleston sky turned pink. Theo opened the door in an unbuttoned shirt, revealing the line of his chest, his hair damp like he'd just showered. "Right on time," he said, his voice low and husky, leading me to the living room. The room glowed with candles, their flicker dancing on stacks of cassettes and a guitar in the corner. The scent of sandalwood and his skin wrapped around me as we sat on the couch, so close our thighs pressed together. He played a new melody, slow, almost sensual, with deep chords that hummed in my chest. "It's about you," he said, locking eyes with me, his hand settling on my knee, fingers slowly gripping the denim. Heat from his touch spread up my leg, and my breathing grew uneven. He leaned closer, his shoulder pressing against mine, and I felt the warmth of his body through his thin shirt. "You know how hard it is to hold back?" he whispered, his fingers sliding higher, grazing the inside of my thigh, light but deliberate, sending shivers across my skin. I turned to him, our faces so close I could feel his breath, warm, with a hint of mint. His eyes, dark and hungry, flicked to my lips, and I leaned in, unable to resist. His hand rose to my neck, his thumb tracing my jaw, and for a moment, I thought we'd crossed the line. But he froze, his breath catching. "You're still with him," he said, though his fingers stayed on my skin. We sat in silence until the melody ended, and he offered coffee to break the tension. I left, but his touches burned inside me. At home, I found Elliot at the kitchen table, holding one of Theo's cassettes. "This yours?" he asked calmly. I froze, unsure what to say. He looked at me, his voice steady, almost weary. "I've been thinking about someone else too, Noah. Maybe it's time we stop." We talked half the night, agreeing to part, no yelling, no tears, just admitting we'd both drifted away. Relief washed over me, but so did pain, knowing I'd broken our home. Theo was my escape, but now I feared he'd slip away too. After parting with Elliot, I felt both free and lost, but thoughts of Theo were the only thing keeping me grounded. His melodies played in my mind, and memories of his touches woke me at night. I texted him the next day, "Can we meet? I need to see you." He replied quickly, "Come over tonight." My heart raced, and I spent the day waiting, picturing his eyes, his hands. I wasn't lying to anyone anymore, but the fear that Theo might slip away gripped my chest. I arrived at his house as stars dotted the Charleston sky. Theo opened the door in a thin white t-shirt, clinging to his torso, his smile promising more than words. "You look like you ran here," he said, his voice soft but with a playful rasp. He led me to the living room, where candles flickered, their light dancing in his eyes. The scent of his cologne, woody, with a hint of citrus, blended with the room's warmth, and I felt my body ease, drawn to his presence. We sat on the couch, his knee pressing against mine, and I sensed the heat radiating from his skin. Theo played a cassette, but the melody was quieter than usual, almost background. "Heard you're free now," he said, his hand settling on my thigh, fingers gripping the fabric of my pants, sending a wave of heat up my spine. I nodded, unable to look away from his lips. He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt his breath glide across my neck, warm and slightly uneven. "You know what you do to me?" he whispered, his fingers creeping higher, tracing the inside of my thigh, teasingly slow. My skin burned under his touch, and I shifted closer, closing the gap between us. His hand rose to my chest, palm resting over my heart, as if feeling its rhythm. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his thumb grazing my collarbone, dipping toward the edge of my shirt. I felt his fingers tremble, but his eyes burned with intent. Our faces were so close I could feel the warmth of his lips, their soft curve. I leaned in, and he met me halfway, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. The moment was electric, but he pulled back, his breathing heavy. "I can't stay, Noah. My life's the road," he said, his voice cracking. My heart tightened, but his hands still held mine. We spent the night talking, his fingers laced with mine until the candles burned out. In the morning he left, leaving a cassette with a new melody and a note, "You'll always be in my songs." I was alone, but his warmth still lingered in me, and I knew this wasn't the end. After Theo left, it felt like part of me vanished with his melodies, but instead of sinking into sorrow, I chose to live. His final cassette sat on my desk, and I played it nightly, letting his guitar and voice remind me I was capable of more. I threw myself into Southern Blooms, crafting bold arrangements that mirrored my emotions. Theo showed me life isn't about waiting, it's about doing, and I enrolled in interior design courses, dreaming of my own studio. For the first time in ages, I felt alive, free, ready for change. But if you were me, would you hold on to the past or step forward? Share your thoughts, I'm curious. Charleston became my home in a new way. I wandered its cobblestone streets, breathing in magnolia scents, finding inspiration in small things, street violinists, the aroma of fresh coffee at the market. Sometimes I thought of Theo, picturing him on the road with his guitar and van. The pain of his absence softened into warmth, and his cassettes became symbols not of loss but of awakening. I started sketching ideas for floral installations, dreaming of an exhibition to tell my story. Would you keep such memories as treasures or let them go? Let me know what you think. 3 months later, I ran into Elliot at the market. He was happy, his eyes bright, and he shared he'd met someone new. We laughed, recalling how our parrot Rico stole chips, and parted easily, like old friends. That moment confirmed I was ready for something new too. I wasn't chasing love, but I was open to it, knowing myself better than before. What's more important, do you think? Closing an old chapter or opening a new one? I'd love to hear your take. That evening, I returned to the shop and froze, spotting an unsigned cassette under the door. My heart leapt. I recognized the knotted ribbon, Theo's handwriting. The cassette held a single melody, wordless but so tender I felt him near. Inside was a note. I'm back in Charleston. Find me. I stood there, clutching the cassette, smiling, unsure if I'd run to him or keep walking my path. Theo was a spark, but was he just a catalyst or something more? How would you react to that note? Share, I want to know.